Is America a cult? Three central themes permeate the founding of America: commerce, faith, and radical self independence. We despise kings and authority figures in general, preferring to persevere in the belief that rational people, meaning you and me and every other person you see in sports stadiums and highways, can decide their own correct course of action. While the pilgrims at Plymouth Rock eventually fell out of favor, the American dream is replete with the notion that hard work, a good attitude, and a little luck is all that any of us need to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps and achieve the middle class dream of being the richest person that we know. If I were going to name the American religion, it wouldn't be an Abrahamic faith, Judaism, Islam, or any sort of Christianity. It certainly wouldn't be Hinduism or Buddhism. No, I think I'd have to call it the cult of relentless positivity, where we, by which I mean the tone of the nation itself, persists in its own self centered belief that the American dream is something other than a dream. This is all a long way to introduce Nina Burleigh, my guest on the show today. I've known Nina for about a decade from the time that we were both working on separate stories about a cult that emerged in the Arizona desert called Diamond Mountain, where a man died while meditating his way to enlightenment, while his declared living goddess wife attempted to use her spiritual powers to heal him. Well, she failed. The story that I wrote up ended up in Playboy magazine and eventually as a core piece of my book, The Enlightenment Trap. Meanwhile, Burleigh's piece was in Rolling Stone. But there's a lot more to Nina than that story. She's the author of 7 books, ranging in topics from political history, virology, high crimes, religion, and on the women who surrounded Donald Trump. Here's a line from her bio. Her books share a theme of examining the tension between belief and science, religion and rationality in post Enlightenment life, including the 1830s American politics among post revolutionary French scientists in Egypt, Cold War era CIA conspiracy theories, fake biblical archaeology in Jerusalem today, and the role of faith versus science in an Italian courtroom. Yeah, she's done quite a bit. She also has this great Substack newsletter called American Freakshow about the insanity of America today. And I'll have all the links to that down in the description. So, Nina, thanks so much for being here with me today. You're a journalist, and I appreciate that. One of the things that like connects a lot of your work, right? You know, when we first ran into each other, we were looking at sort of this American Buddhism meets, um, the law of attraction. The idea of like this way of just believing that you could be wealthy and have great sex and great infinite health that would like manifest it. Um, and that seems to be like I call it the cult of relentless positivity. That's my word for it, but it seems to infect like everything. And it feels to me that we have this sort of misapprehension of the connection of like causality in the world, where we think intentions are all that matters. And it goes all the way up to the I mean, to some degree, even the Supreme Court. I mean, you just wrote an article about how the Supreme Court are priest kings. This was in your newsletter. What can you tell me about this?
Well, I had called them the American mullahs, but the editor at my Substack actually has an editor now, which is great. They were like, "Yeah, we don't want to call them mullahs." And then we were like, "Well, what could we call them?" Well, priest kings. That's a good idea. So yeah, well, the priest kings are the theocrats who are in charge of our system right now. I mean, they've been working to seize power relentlessly. Leonard Leo and these Catholic, he's a Knight of Malta Catholic. These Catholic extremists have been working at this project since like the 1980s, tirelessly, fanatically. That's what they were. These are the anti-abortion fanatical. In this case, in the priest king case, it's the Catholics, extreme Catholics, and I don't mean to tar all Catholics with this. It's about 30% of Catholics probably fall into the anti-Pope Francis, hardcore religious, elito school. But yeah, I mean, we have a system that, we're supposed to separate church and state, but they've been chipping away at it, chipping away at it, chipping away at it. And the Hobby Lobby ruling, which preceded the Dobbs ruling, which should have told us which direction they were going, is actually a ruling that says, and I'm paraphrasing it, it privileges people's feelings about a scientific fact over the scientific fact what was the Hobby Lobby ruling? The Hobby Lobby ruling said the Obamacare had required providers, pharmacists, and so on, to cover pharmacists and companies to cover contraception within this insurance system. And the opposition, the plaintiffs, went to the court and said, no, we think it's bad. We don't believe in this. Contraception is an abortion, or whatever they were. And so what they did there was they privileged the feelings of a bunch of nuns who were, or doctors who maybe work in Catholic, or pharmacists who work in the Bible Belt, and who feel like, well, I'm not selling that girl a bottle of birth control pills or a tab of birth control pills because I don't feel like it's good for them, when in fact the science says this is what this is. So that's what we have now.
That's fascinating. I worked in India for a long time, and one of the sort of the principles that are in the Indian legal system is that you can't you can't report on things that go against the sentiments of the people, right? Which is it's a terrifying law from a journalism perspective, because like what are the sentiments of the people? Who gets to decide what the sentiments of the people are? And it's really interesting that you point to the Hobby Lobby case as sort of a legal precedent that's pushing us to be like, oh, my subjective reality is more important than facts.
Exactly. And that's underlies everything now. It underlies the fight against masks. It underlies the refusal to get vaccinated, which we can get into if we want. That's a whole other hornet's nest. But the refusal to act in the public good based on scientific fact, and that's the way they're going. It's a type of privileging of individual rights that goes way beyond what. Um, I mean, it's an experiment in how far our country is going to go down the road, in this concept of individual rights trumping the community, right?
And it's so weird though, because on like the community is made up of lots of individuals, but it's like one person can just say no, I don't like this, and another person's individual rights are just stepped on and crushed.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, I think they would argue, right? Like, oh, having gay marriage it offends their, the sense of what God wants them to do. So it shouldn't be legal. But
Mhm.
actually, letting other people do what they feel like and doing your thing is actually what we're all about, right?
Mhm.
So they're in the one hand, that's what they want to do. They want to control what other people are doing if it offends their social, moral, whatever framework. But when it comes to science, it's like, no, my feeling about this
Mhm.
trumps all, and I will not get that vaccine, and I don't care if everybody gets measles
Mhm.
or COVID.
Yeah, it's you know, just like what last week we had the bump stock ruling, right? Which is the idea that you can have a weapon that's basically like a machine gun. And it shoots a lot of bullets, and was used to kill 60 people and injure 400 people in Las Vegas, in 2017. And the
And
idea is
that's the
that,
opening event of my novel, by the way.
oh, good. I mean,
Yeah. I,
terrible. I'm sorry.
my
And you,
my novel is about disinformation, conspiracy thinking related to that event.
I mean, you look at the Supreme Court ruling, and as somebody who, I don't really consider myself a liberal or a conservative, although I think I'm just being pushed over into the liberal side every single day, because it's like, well, that's at least there's some rationality over there. But you know, if we look at like the Supreme Court right now, it is the there used to be a time when there was broad acceptance that the Supreme Court was a legitimate body, and it was a necessary check and balance, and had an enormously high approval rating, which has steadily been declining, and it sort of feels like it's fallen off a cliff in the last 20 years, with an acceleration in the last 10 years. And it reminds me of this time when again, I was working in India, and I did two big stories on like criminal justice there, where I looked at mafia bosses, and I looked at a communist insurgency in central India, and the root of their power for both of these people, these separate violent organizations, was that they both created separate judicial systems. The Maoists were like, look, no one cares about these tribal people. We will create our own tribunals and like figure out land deals and stuff and adjudicate and kill anyone who doesn't like our authority. And the same thing with the mafia bosses. They created their own like separate legal system, separate judicial system. And I feel like the faith in your country has to do with your faith in the ability of that country to deliver justice. That doesn't feel like it's there anymore. And how far are we really away from a separate response that rises up from the people or criminals or a separatist movement here in the United States?
I think we already are there. I mean, I think the separatist movement, unfortunately, is coming from the fascist edge. It's the right. I always say this, like this country was ripe for revolution after, I mean, Citizens United, Iraq War, built on lies and bullshit. Citizens United is why we have the Supreme Court. You said 20 years. It's about 20 years since since Leonard Leo started. Well, he was actually engaged already with W, I think, like putting those people on. But in the last, since 2010, there's been unlimited amounts of money, dark money flowing in, and the oligarchy in this country. We talk about the oligarchs in Russia. This is the country of oligarchs. It's run by the oligarchs. So I always say, the country was ripe for revolution, and it's too damn bad that it's coming from the other side. But that is, they are rebelling against that. It's fascinating. If you're on, like, the one thing about Elon Musk's Twitter is that, okay, he did start putting in my feed these conspiracy theorists that and like hardcore right wing, like where the right meets the left, people who have like hundreds of thousands of followers. And I see them. I don't know who they are. I didn't follow them, but all of a sudden I'm seeing, and you can see them, like they're angry about the Iraq War. They're angry about the whole engagement with we can't be the world's cop. Put the money here. That all of that, like, that America First stuff. That you see them starting to talk about. You even see some of the right wing intellectual leaders, like Sohrab Ahmari, I think his name is. I can't pronounce it, but some of these guys who are on this sort of like the new right. It's not the alt right. It's like this. A little bit JD Vance, who's completely disgusting, but they're actually starting to talk about like more state controlled industrial things, and like a little more state involvement, and a little bit more pushback on the private equity free market. Harvard MBA, Uber alles, Jared Kushner, utterly cynical. You know what I mean? They're starting to come, and that's coming from the right. The left has always talked about that. You had Bernie, right? But the Democrats wouldn't let Bernie rise. They crushed him. So, not crushed him, but obviously he was not able to run against Trump. So yeah, I mean, I think there is a revolution. And unfortunately, the revolution is these guys driving up and down the road here with their coal rollers and, the white ISIS Yahoo stuff with their flags. I don't know if you have that in Colorado, but
yeah, we have that in Colorado. It's interesting because the critique is not entirely wrong. There are things to be upset about in America, right?
yes,
there are power structures that are controlling our lives in ways that is horrendous. And
yes,
it's like the left and the right should be able to agree on this. And yet for some reason, which is so hard for me to like, and this is why I think that America has this cult ideology where you separate cause from effect. And that's really what cults are about. It's separating cause from effect. And therefore you go to a strong leader. Like the response seems to be to embrace someone who wants to create a feudal or monarchic society. It's like we need a strong leader to fight all of these oligarchs, and both the left and the right want this. Like there are Democrats out there who's like, we need somebody to set this country right with liberal policies. We just don't have that person there yet. But if we did, they would embrace it. And then the right seems to just have that leader that's out there right now. And it's fascinating because some of the critiques are absolutely right. The COVID response was a total mess. doesn't mean the science of vaccination was wrong, or masks were a terrible idea, but there were so many issues coming in there, and we're so polarized getting to the point where we are right now.
Well, I think the cult aspect of this, and the the finding a way to separate people from the reality is playing out really in the obsession with borders, and with the steam valve is like, blame black and brown people coming in, blame those brown people, right? That's what we see them doing. That's the place where the left and the right cannot meet, because we know that that's not what the problem is. But I was just talking to, there's a guy running for our congressional district here is one of the key congressional House districts in the country right now. It's the 19th in New York. New York basically handed the House to the MAGA people in 22, because everybody's asleep at the wheel, and 4 congressional districts in New York went. This is a blue state. It shouldn't have. Anyhow, this guy, Josh Riley, they're doing polling in this area, and he talks to people, and I said, what is more important? Because he talked about abortion first, and he talked about the border issues, and I said, what are you finding people here care about more? And this is red. This is a Trumpy area. And he said, oh, borders by far. It's about borders. It's borders, it's inflation, and then it's abortion. Abortion isn't going to win in this. I mean, maybe. I still think a lot of women are pissed off about it, but it's borders, borders, borders. And there's a terrific book. I think he won the Pulitzer or some award in the last couple of years. Greg Grandin's book. Have you heard of him? He's a historian at Yale. And it's called, it's the myth of the frontier is what it's about. And he basically traces from the very beginning, the end of the frontier. It's like basically what's happened in this country is, from the beginning, it was based on, like, we have this, eminent domain, or endless opportunity to keep moving out west, right? First. And it was all about sort of eradicating the brown people, the Indians. And then after the frontier ran out, we were fighting Mexico. And then then we went to the Philippines and all these international expeditions. And we've now come to what, basically his theme was, like, the end of this myth of, the endless frontier is this wall. And the wall that Trump is talking about, it basically is what it's doing is it's walling. Now the truth of this sort of violent, what this all was like the steam valve for American violence, is like the wall is shut now and we're in it. Like, there isn't another frontier. It's a fascinating book. And I think about it a lot when I think about, yes, people are coming across the border, though. That's also true. On the other hand, up here in this area in New York, there's a lot of farms. There, apples and apple orchards that go on for hundreds of miles, and they need people. They need bodies, and white Americans aren't doing that work. So, and we have a lot of land.
We have a shrinking population, which
and
we're
we have a
also
shrinking
very scared
population,
about.
and then that is also part of the this, like, on the right, that's the fear, because it's white fear, it's white identity politics that Trump has been plucking, playing on his violin for 8 years now. And who knew that we had so many of our fellow Americans who were susceptible to that? That's right. The thing that sort of still shocks me, like, from what did Obama win? From 08 to 16, we were all like walking around in a dreamland. Like, this is great.
Directly. They don't say, hey, I am a KKK racist, because they're not. They're not an old school racist.
No, they're not. It's a spectrum.
Right. It's a new fear of leaving, and it's not even fully articulated, right? In some ways, it's not appropriate to call them racist because of the way we've framed that word over the years. It is a new iteration of this fear of being replaced, right? Of this fear of losing power. And it's still a long storied American tradition, but they don't want slavery to come back. They just want their little piece of the pie to be safe.
And with good reason, because the piece of the pie has been chipped away at by private equity, oligarchy. I mean, you could do a whole show on just what the insane stuff that private equity is into. A friend of mine down in Virginia said they bought up all these trailer parks because it's just, it's cash that they're getting from Social Security recipients. Cash. It's sickening. It's called The End of the Myth for your.
So now a word from our sponsors, which is you. I just want to say thank you so much for being here. This sort of work is incredibly hard, whether it's my hard-hitting investigative journalism or interviews with really amazing thinkers. It means the world to me that you are watching this. And there's a couple things you can do to support my work. There's obviously the algorithm part of things where you can hit the like and subscribe buttons down below. That helps the algorithm, spread this around to people. But more importantly, I just want you to know that I have this Substack newsletter, which is where the main support for my channel actually comes from. And I would love you to get early access to my work and be part of that community so that I can keep going up against really, really powerful players with just truth on my side. So consider doing that and consider getting my newsletter where you can see, my thoughts as we go forward. And without further ado, back to our program. You've written 7 books, right? But one of the books, and I haven't read it, but I really feel like I should because, I've always thought, if I were going to write a novel about the Trump administration, right? If I was going to go do it and novelize and make this a really sexy, fun thriller, I would do it from Melania Trump's perspective because I find her fascinating, right? And you happen to have done a ton of reporting on the women around Trump, and what can you tell us about those relationships, and what does it tell us about why Trump does amazingly well in America among white college-educated women, which I would think he shouldn't, but he does. And
Well, first of all, I would just put a little corrective in there. I don't think that he does disgustingly well, but he doesn't do amazingly well. It's not true that that he has a majority of white women. That's absolutely not true. That was something that came out of the 2016 from exit polls, but it was actually not right. It's less than that. I'm just, sticking up for my
disgustingly well.
My clan. It's disgusting. And yeah. So my book, it started out as a snarky magazine cover called The Queens of Trumplandia. And I just focused on the wives and Ivanka. And then, Simon & Schuster were like, oh, why don't we do a book on this? And, they thought they were going to get right-wing readers, I think, because it was that imprint. It's a gallery. They were like, yeah, maybe we can just do a whole book about them and add in mom and grandma. So I did. I wrote this book. I researched it. And it's fascinating. I mean, the family, the mother and the grandmother and 2 wives are immigrants. Okay, so let's just put that right there. They're the ones who came across the border. Of course, they're white immigrants. They're as white as can be. Grandma was a German, China doll-looking German woman, married to Fred Trump, who made his money, as everybody knows, out in brothels in the Yukon. Went back to Germany and brought the girl next door back to the U.S. Promptly dies of the Spanish flu, which, by the way, during the COVID, Trump doesn't even discuss that his dad was left fatherless, and it was absolutely a family story that they knew well. The dad died in a day. It was like the Spanish flu just took him, and left grandma, German-speaking grandma, with 3 or 4 kids in Queens, and a little piece of land that Fred had bought, grandpa, and grandma started the Trump organization, not dad, not Fred Trump, but grandma. So it's started by a woman. It's started by a woman. Yes, but it gets better. She starts it. Trump, they never talk about it. The Trump organization is started by a female. Any other politician in America, they'd be waving that stuff around. You would get more women voters if you talked about that. Then Fred, the dad, who is working like an ant, like the mom makes it, but the dad kind of builds it out. Fred Trump marries a Scottish immigrant from an impoverished, tiny little, I went there, it's in the Outer Hebrides, closer to Iceland than London, dirt poor, one of 8 kids. Half of them had come to New York in the 1917s, 18s, 19s, right? They came here after World War I because there was work here in the Gilded Age homes, because wealthy New Yorkers of that era liked to have British maids and butlers and footmen from the British Isles. So his mother came here. The older sisters were already working as maids. She came here, and guess where she worked? You're not going to believe this. It hardly made any news. I found this in the census in the New York Public Library. She worked her first job in the United States in the Carnegie household in New York, the richest people in the United States. She worked in their house, and she was this like little maid polishing the banisters and watching the great lady, Carnegie's widow, going having dinners for 200 in the great hall. It's the closest thing that America has to royalty. And so the theme is sort of the family is that like that was passed down. She couldn't be torn away from the coronation of Elizabeth in front of TV. He wrote about that in his book. That's passed directly down to Trump. This obsession with guilt, with GILT guilt, with classiness. It's all coming from the mom, who the dad, made all this money. He thought she was ridiculous. She wanted to go around in furs, and he got her a chauffeur in a Rolls or some kind of fancy car and driving around Queens. That's who the mother is, passed straight down into Donald. So here he is. Let's fast forward. He's president. He gets invited to meet the Queen. Remember that, Queen Elizabeth? And the Trump kids are all like, yeah, let's go. We go too, right? Ivanka and the brothers, they all troop over and they meet Queen Elizabeth. And of course he does something stupid, pats her on the back or like totally blows protocol. But okay, not once in the whole, all of the lead up to this trip, not once does anyone in that apparatus, the Trump messaging system, say, and by the way, his mother was a maid. She came from the British Isles, and the granddaughter of a maid, the son of a maid and the granddaughter of a maid from the British Isles is meeting the Queen of England. That is America. That who wouldn't have done that? So basically, this, because he has to pretend like he's old money because it comes from, and then because he's sort of a misogynist.
It's actually a great story. It's actually really inspirational.
Yes. If I was writing, if I was like, why don't, anyway, so that's that generation. And then you're asking about the women. Okay. So Ivana, very interesting, absolutely stunning beauty when he met her, probably mobbed up in some level with the Czech secret police. Not saying that, Luke Harding's done a lot of reporting on this, and I don't know that she was actually like on the payroll, but she definitely had some special privileges to get out of the Czechoslovakia when she did. And her dad definitely was being debriefed all the time. I'm not down with the whole Russian conspiracy stuff, but they definitely had his eyes they had their eyes on him through Ivana. Then there's Marla, which through Marla, Ivana basically becomes this uber capitalist through him. She's like the apt pupil. She gets better at it than he is. And he dumps her right away because he can't have a woman around him like that. He goes on record saying, don't let your wife work. And he gets together with the showgirl who, the actress who promptly, she was American, and she was like not putting up with he was trying to mold her. And this is when he gets into like the Pygmalion part of his life, where he's sort of all of his relationships with women have to do with like, I'll get you a modeling contract, honey. I can get you on the cover of a magazine. It's all sort of what he wants projected onto them. And it's all 100% transactional. Okay. And then into his life comes Melania, who is perfectly fine with the transactional thing. Absolutely 100%. Not somebody who had, as far as I could tell, ever had any interest in, politics or, current events, or, she really just, or even really being out in front of things. She wasn't a great model because she's shy, I think. And she's closed off. So she wasn't great at modeling, but she was a beauty, and she attracted the attention of rich men, and she was in the right place at the right time. And they they want, the reason that they, well, you can ask me about this, but they went after me. The book is vetted, of course. You're dealing with them.
I want to ask you that next, but I want to know: did you ever have any direct interactions with Melania?
Um, just to press people. I never actually. I saw her. I went to events where she showed up. She
Hmm.
can hardly speak English is the problem. She
What?
really was having a hard time speaking English. That's another reason why she didn't want to be uh, 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 on the stage with him. She
How
was
does she hang
dragged
out
into it.
if she doesn't really speak English well? Like, what is that relationship? You said it's transactional, but you know what? I just look at her. I'm like, oh, this guy is like, obviously he has the grab them by the pussy line. He has like, the Stormy Daniels payments, over and over again. There's these things that are would be deal breakers in many other relationships. How do we characterize like what is actually going on? Because I am so confused.
Well, I mean, I don't like to be, sort of suspecting how they behave behind closed doors or guessing, but I think that it's been pretty widely reported that they don't have, he told the Stormy Daniels, I think, or no, Karen McDougal, the other catch and
Hmm.
kill Playboy bunny. They didn't sleep in the same bed. That was already back there in the 2010s. I mean, one of the things about him that is kind of critical,
Hmm.
a problem, is that he has from his dad passed down this sort of horror. It's like this shamanistic horror of female biology,
Hmm.
and that all of this stuff that was going on with Stormy and also Karen McDougal that got him into trouble. All those things were going on right as or after Melania gave birth. So that stuff grosses him out, and it's part of the family. The Trump family history. I mean, the dad had this old world attitude. He even told his daughters, like one of them came home pregnant. He's like, "Don't say that word in my household.
Oh wow.
Don't say pregnant." It
Hmm.
was like something really dirty and disgusting. And so I think, the roots of misogyny are in disgust, and I think that is very much a part of the way that Trump feels about women. That's why, but he loves the plastic fantastic,
Yeah.
camera ready thing, because then they can be photographed next to him. They go
Hmm.
they he for him, it's 100% arm candy. The women around him are accoutrements to cutting the deal, or
Hmm.
sealing the deal. I mean,
Hmm.
he actually was part of, some of these women were the Melania's sort of level of modeling, if you want to call it that, in New York. Some of them were like people who would be dispatched to, like, I think, like a Trump, party, or where he was closing a deal with somebody,
Hmm.
and they would have these like beauties just sort of draped around. And you've
Hmm.
seen that if you were in New York and you ever went to any like
Hmm.
club opening or something. You walk in, you're like, God, there are a lot of beautiful people here.
Yeah.
Well, that is a level of marketing. They called them, or modeling. They called them like the party models.
Hmm.
And it was a real thing, like that you would pay an
Hmm.
agency and they'd send over like 10 gazelles
Right.
in or whatever. I can't think of a
Yeah, one of my
designer name,
first jobs
Versace
was
or
at
whatever.
a fashion magazine in New York, and like I went to all those parties, and it was cool. There were a lot of beautiful women there, and yeah,
Yes.
there's this and the payments are maybe they're not even payments. Maybe they're just there's the invite list, and there's like the social
Well,
capital
yeah. I
attached.
mean, there is for sure more, Melania meets Trump. I mean, they don't really tell you exactly when they met. That's the issue with the book. We found out that they met much earlier than they said they did.
Mm-hmm.
But, she meets him at an event for models where rich men were coming to watch models on the runway in Victoria's Secret lingerie.
And it just feels like this eventually connects to Jeffrey Epstein at some point. I don't know. We don't need to really push that very far, but like, there are photos.
It's
There are photos.
everything. Epstein, I mean, it's like the Epstein web. There was just something yesterday where in Palm Beach, their Palm Beach Post is trying to extract the grand jury transcripts from this, one of the old Epstein cases. And the judge down there is like, no, we're locking that up, even though it has been used. Again, they're locking it up. Things that the lockdowns on him continue. It's so
Mhm.
strange. I mean, the story may never be told, or it'll be told like after we're long
Right.
gone.
So, so here's the other thing about reporting, right? We are reporters. We're out there. We're trying to get the truth. And sometimes the truth is hard to come by. Like how you get the truth is always tricky. It involves leaked documents or someone admitting something. And this is hard work, right? Because we're always fighting against someone who's much more powerful than us. After your book came out, you got sued in England, when the Telegraph, I guess they posted an excerpt, I'm guessing that was the originating thing. And then BuzzFeed issued an apology. No, not BuzzFeed. I'm sorry. The
No.
Telegraph.
Alex, let me just
Right.
explain it, because I did not get sued. That's the
Okay.
first thing. They did not sue Nina Burleigh. What they did was, at Telegraph, which is a right-leaning paper, wanted to excerpt the book, and my publisher was like, "Nah, we don't really want them to take a piece of it." They never said why, and I, being like, "Well, I might as well just write you a piece because I want to sell my book in England." I basically took things out of the book and cobbled together an article based on the reporting that had to do with her, and they sent a threat letter through Charles Harder, who's the Gawker Slayer. Your listeners may or may not know who he is, but he
Oh, I've done
strikes,
a
the
whole
name
show on it.
strikes, okay, so
Yeah.
the name strikes fear into the heart of all media companies. And they said, the letter said, this, and this is a lie. It's not true. And one of those, everything was not a lie. It had all been vetted in the US, and that's why they didn't do anything in the US. But in the UK, they have a different set of standards for what the person who is claiming to be defamed can say. And so they wrote this letter, and the Telegraph editors called or told me about it, and I said, well, the particular issue was when they met. We have, great sourcing on that. They met years before. She was bragging about it, and long before they supposedly met cute at this Victoria's Secret thing. You can go get those people. They are in Slovenia and Albania. They can tell you this. They're on the record. And they said, no, we don't have time. We need this to go away. And so what they did was they yanked the story off their site and they wrote an apology, which I think they published on the site. Well, that's all they wanted, because all they needed to do from that was disseminate that and say, well, look, fake news. And it puts a little black mark on my reputation, and it puts a black mark on the book. Fortunately, one of the old time bureau chief, I used to work for Time Magazine, the old time bureau chief and his wife are barristers in London, in the UK. And they saw this and they were like, that's outrageous. And they took the case and went back they sued the Telegraph on my behalf.
Yes.
And wrote a letter, which is on my website and which has been published. CNN, which covered this, should have picked it up. It still pisses me off that they didn't. My response was, this is not true, and here's why. And anyway, it went up through the first level, and a judge ruled, well, not that it wasn't defaming, but that what this whole issue was is that, they asked to take this story down, had not harmed my reputation, which was outrage. And the lawyers were they insisted. They're like, you have to take this up on appeal because it'll get overturned. It's bullshit. We have, hundreds and hundreds of links where this was spread all over the world. And I thought, you know what? This is where we get into litigation terrorism. I don't have money. They had taken it pro bono, but it was going to start costing money. And I thought, I can just see, my kids were starting to go to college. I could see this being a money pit just for that reason, to stop this thing from going around. I had to weigh it out. Like, well, whatever. It is what it is. It's a cost of doing business. As you say, as a journalist, as somebody who's we must speak truth to power. We must expose. We must talk about these people as for what they are. And we have to expect that they're going to come after us and try to defame us.
Yeah, I mean, I get like 1 or 2 legal threats a month that come in from.
That means you're doing your job.
It does, and it's always from these billion-dollar companies. And I have to say, of course, they went after you in England, which has the crappiest protections for journalists. But in the United States, I don't know about New York jurisprudence entirely, but I do know my state, Colorado, we have actual protections from journalists. And what I see over and over again are the mainstream outlets that I used to work for. Like I used to be for all of the big ones, right?
Yeah.
I think the magazines you've written for may be a little bit more prestigious, but I was with Wired and Mother Jones and NPR and these people, Playboy.
Those are big.
Yeah.
And they're backing down is what's happening.
They
are backing down.
All over and over again. It's because of this Gawker judgment, and they just don't they've abdicated their responsibility, which is why you and I
Absolutely.
have gone over to Substack. It's why you and I have gone over to doing things independently, because it's the only way journalists can survive. And I will say, like, I don't mind the fight. Like, this is like, you said you back down, and I'm like, you know what? I would actually take these fights. I don't have kids though. I only have cats to put through school. Um, but 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 it feels like there's a principle that to fight for truth, which is very, very important, and that because it's been abdicated by the mainstream media, now it's unfortunately going to be people like you and me who either have to stand up for it, or the whole notion of truth through journalism, through the hard work that we do, will be lost. And all you're going to get are grifters, because all you have is the positive story. And that's all they want. They just want the good story to tell you why they're all good. And they want to hide their stuff. And the last bulwark is journalism. Like, I don't know of another safety net maybe some nonprofits that do digging, but that's basically journalism too.
Yeah, I mean, they're going after. Look, they're going
Mm-hmm.
after Media Matters,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're going after accounting USA, that watches the Supreme Court. I think those people have to be very nervous.
Mm-hmm.
And Media Matters, didn't Elon Musk go after them? I think
Yep.
because they,
And Alito
yeah.
went after ProPublica yesterday because,
Oh, I didn't know that. So,
mm-hmm.
so yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, I don't know what, Guardian is the only place that I think is really still standing up and doing a lot of investigative journalism of the biggies. I mean, the Times does too, but, um, and ProPublica, obviously. But yeah, it's scary. And, I don't know how this plays out. I mean, I pitch sometimes investigative documentaries because we did this thing on Ghislaine Maxwell, 3-part series a couple of years ago. Well, she was already, no, they didn't greenlight it until she was arrested. And that we had been pitching it, and then she was arrested, and then Peacock and NBC greenlighted. And they let us do an investigative dig into, and we have, we could talk about Epstein for hours, but we did find out some things, and some of it managed to get on the air. We pitch investigative things now to the same companies. Maybe not Peacock, but other big companies. And repeatedly, what we're getting is, well, has there been a lawsuit filed? Had they been arrested yet? Have they been, where's the legal case? Well, we're kind of concerned. We kind of wouldn't want to do this until you have a legal, the police have arrested. I'm not kidding you. So if you're doing this investigative stuff about miscreants and rich ones especially, and you find things out and you know it from the record, they don't want to be the first one to put it out there. And these are big media. I'm not going to name who they are. The big influential media companies.
Over and
That's
over
how
again.
scared they are.
Yeah, I had a long conversation with again, one of these major media companies. I'm not going to name them because it doesn't matter, because they're all the same.
Right.
Lawyers on the phone, and we're like, well, how do we know that person died? I'm like, because they're dead, right? Like, and because there were witnesses who saw them die. And they're like, well, until we have a coroner's report and blah, 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 and like 9 other things, we can't say it. I'm like,
Wow.
they're playing a standard of evidence game because
Wow.
of the possibility that they might get sued in a foreign jurisdiction.
Right.
And
Right.
and the thing is that if you actually took it to court, you would absolutely win. I mean, absolutely there's always going to be a risk, but you would win under the principle that I have sources, I know this happened, and what are you going
Right.
to do? And like what I've realized is that the best fight that we have, Nina, is not to rely on the courts, because I think Americans are always suing people in our brains. We're like, what would this be like in front of a judge? Like, no, our defense is talking and keep on pushing the deal, because when they come after us, and they come after me all the time. So like, I just did this video on a supplement company called AG1. They sent $1 billion lawyer. The lawyer took down Fox News after me. And I was like, I'm not going to be intimidated by you. I have documents that you're literally lying to me in your legal communications. And if you want to go toe to toe, I don't have any money, but I will go toe to toe with you, because I have the principle that I'm standing on. And I think most journalists don't want to do that because it's scary. Uh,
Absolutely.
but
No,
I,
you're I salute you. I salute you, Scott. I mean, you're putting yourself out there, and um in this milieu. I mean, basically what they try to do is just discredit us and make us look like we're doing fake news. I mean, that's as far as they went with me. They wanted to look like fake news so they can say fake news. And and we are being replaced by their influencers, paid influencers who pretend to be journalists, and they're all over Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it.
Who
They're
make
all
much
over,
more money than you,
and
right?
they
Like,
make a lot of money, and they write for PACs like
mhm,
Trump PACs and MAGA PACs are actually,
mhm,
they're sending them money in addition to advertising, I suppose, and they are just spewing these lies.
mhm,
And but they've got these sheep like people behind them,
yeah,
following them, hundreds of thousands. Again, I doubt, I have to say that there's a difference between bots and followers on
oh
social
yeah,
media, right?
mhm,
But yeah, they're making money. They sell books. They get on Fox. They're
mhm,
amplified in this sort of media ecosystem, and they're just spewing lies. And that's the downside of our system, our speech system, which does allow people to say a lot.
mhm.
But it's opened the door to avalanches of
Mhm.
disinformation and
And they will tell you,
misinformation.
they will say that you're in the pocket of X, Y, and Z, whether it's big pharma or
Always,
George Soros or some sort of
always,
dark money pit that's somehow funding you. And if
always.
only the dark money pit was behind me. Like, honestly, big pharma and
Right,
Soros want to go drop $10 million on me. I will do some amazing journalism with that.
right, right,
So please, big pharma, you're welcome to come. But they're not, because they also don't want truth, right? Because we also go
right,
after those people too.
right, right,
Oh man, it is nice to. I do feel like I fear for the younger journalists that are out there, because there are people out there who really want truth, who really want to go out there and do this work, and it's just so much harder because you and we came up when there was a media, right? When there was a
right.
newsroom, when there was like fact checking as like ordinary, and there were people who were like, I will defend you if
Yep,
this stuff happens. The younger people, they have no choice but to be influencers because there's no one who's got their back, and they don't have the skills to understand how to get their
exactly.
own back when it comes
Exactly.
to it.
Yeah, I teach journalism at the grad school at NYU in the winter,
Hmm.
a 5-hour seminar every week for like 2 months on writing and reporting. And I see the students, some of them struggling with, well, do we really want to get engaged with current events, with
Hmm.
what's going on in this world? And that a lot of them this year were like, let's write about the TikTok trend and skinny jeans and
Hmm.
music and cats or whatever. I mean, I'm
Hmm.
not kidding. It was an interesting experience this year, but also I think, and again, like there were Gaza encampments out the sidewalk
Right.
at their university,
Hmm.
and there wasn't a whole lot going on with that in the journalism department this year. But I think that also it was a class that was particularly interested in culture
Hmm.
over you know our standard politics
I think that's
slash
going to be the
current
way of
events
things
thing.
because people don't, because they know politics are so divisive. Like once you start talking about something, you're on the left or the right, whether or not you're
Yes,
actually on the left or the right. Because I'm not
that's
on the left or
right.
the right. I'm just, I think I'm tending left because there's at least a little more sane. But like ideologically, I'm in a different place. I basically hate all of the power players, and
Right,
and I think they're all corrupt. And I will
right.
poke at all of them in what I do. But I guess that means I'm a leftist. I don't know. Um, yeah.
Poking at power makes you net in by definition left. Maybe. I mean, certainly in the oh, but then you would have the
When
right.
using
The
truth.
right.
Yeah. I can
What?
use a gun. You can go get a flag and a gun and be on the right side of things, and
That's
also
right.
also poke at power. Like, and actually, I have legitimate problems as we've been over. All right, now I wanted to ask you a question. I'm going to take a left turn here. Okay, we've been going down the politics section, and if you and audience, American Freak Show, that's her Substack. It's amazing. Go subscribe. Like, links down there. You know how to do it. But let me go. Let me talk about another thing that I find interesting about you. And I have not read this book, but I feel like I should read this book. It's called Unholy Business. It's about the trade in biblical era artifacts, and it looks so amazing because There are, I think you said there were 30,000 archaeological sites or archaeological artifacts that were being, declared as authentic. Some might have been authentic, a lot weren't authentic. What do we need to know about the fake biblical artifact trade? And what does this say about the connections between faith, capital, and ideology?
Okay. Well, it's a great story. In fact, thanks for bringing it up because it's the book I most enjoyed doing. I felt like I was in a movie like the Maltese Falcon or something from the minute I stepped foot off the El Al flight into Tel Aviv and into Jerusalem. Basically, it's a story that takes off from a trial that went on for many years in Israel of an Israeli designer, industrial designer, who was charged with kind of operating a ring using Palestinian amateur diggers of archaeological sites, many in the West Bank. And when you said 30,000, you're actually referring to there are 30,000 archaeological sites in the Palestinian Israeli area. It's filled with hordes from pre-biblical, well, if you read the Bible as the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament does go back many, many, many centuries before Christ, right? So, but it's, they're non Abrahamic religions, right? They're the bull worshippers, right? Okay, so there's a lot of these hordes with like they know where they are. The Palestinians are natural. A lot of them, these that he was working with, were sort of natural archaeologists because they lived in these mountains and they knew where the stuff was. So they would bring to the border the Green Line, and he would give them like $50, and then he would take them, and often in that period of time, there was not a lot of Hebrew writing. We don't have a lot of relics that have King Josiah or something's name on them. What you do have in that region is, of course, endless amounts of Egyptian writing because they proceed by many, many millennia, actually, the Abrahamic religions. And you have the Turkish, the Hittite, and the Sumerians, cuneiform in Iraq. So there is a lot of writing, ancient writing, but in that part of the world, that part of the Middle East, the relics have no writing on them because the Judaic culture was not. They weren't, even though it looks like now it was. They were right. The scribes were writing everything down. They weren't carving it into the rocks and so on. So this guy was taking this stuff and then altering it. He had studied like ancient Hebrew letters and he was putting Hebrew lettering on things, and that would make them much more valuable to this kind of tiny weird group of people who are billionaires again and collect Judaica, be, collect ancient, what they believe to be connected to like a Jewish king, or a passage in the Bible, let's say, or proving that that Solomon's temple actually existed with its walls of gold, which it's never been archaeologically proven. So he was engaged in this game, and he got caught. He got caught actually by the Israeli authorities and put on trial. And then my book was, I basically went over there thinking, oh, I'm going to, because they were also selling this stuff to the evangelical Christians in the United States, the Christian Zionists who love this stuff, they would pay for it too. Some of it ended up at Baylor, in Texas, and Southern Baptists wanted it. And also there's a tradition of like Christians going into the Holy Land and digging. Actually, biblical archaeology, or that the archaeology of that region, really starts with people, British, Victorian pastors going and digging, this cross in one hand and the spade in the other, looking for proof of the Bible. So the whole thing is about, for the faker, it's about making money. For the Judaica and the Israeli national right, it was about land claims, because if you could pull stuff up and say, hey, this proves that the Jews were here in this part of the world, and it goes all the way up into Syria. I mean, when you hear this from the river to the sea, and it's the Palestinians saying they want to wipe out the Jews, the religious right in Israel has their own river to the sea thing. They want it. They're like, the Jews of ancient Israel, they controlled things from Iraq down to Egypt or whatever. They have this huge plot of land that they're imagining as their historical footprint, which is also not true. So it's all about like the scientific history of the Bible and the fakery of these things to make money and to make land claims and also to keep the Christian right here fed, right? So it's a really interesting subculture. I'm telling you, it was such a riot to study. I drove all over. I went down into the Negev and interviewed people. I went up to the Galilee. I know Israel and the West Bank pretty well. I haven't been there since 12. But when I'm reading about what's going on there now, I'm like, yep, it was easy to see that was headed in this direction. I couldn't, Jerusalem is a freaking fascinating area. I'm not religious, but you go there and you're like, you feel the gravitas and the strangeness of it because it's the center of all of these monotheistic, and they're fighting nonstop. Every day there were Muslims at the top of the Temple Mount because the Waqf, the Arabs control the top, fending off, fanatical Israeli right wingers who were coming up. They would climb up and they would clash. And the IDF, these soldiers, I feel a little bit sorry for them because they're mostly non-religious. The religious Israelis are exempted. So there are all these young people who had to like separate this crazy stuff that was going on every day. I was staying on the very edge of the eastern side of Jerusalem because the U.S., the Americans have an archaeological institute there dating back to the 20s. It's super cool, and all the archaeologists hang out there. That's where I learned a lot. But every time you'd crossed over, you'd had to pass through, riot gates, and there was always some skerfuffle going on. How people were able to live in Israel through all of these, and nobody ever, and they pretended like the Palestinians don't exist, and then anyway, we don't have to get into that. But that's what the book is about. It's fascinating.
Awesome. It sounds so cool. And it's funny. A few weeks ago, the Atlantic put out, maybe it was a few months ago, the Atlantic put out an article about a lost biblical text that showed that Jesus may or may not have been gay, right? And it's a controversial text, might be fake, might not. Great story though, right? Columbia professor who was involved in it. And this made me realize that the Bible is, it came up together in a conclave and they prayed over it and they decided what books made it and what books didn't make it. There's a whole history to how the Bible was made. And then, Nina, I had this idea on how to save journalism. Okay, I'm going to bring this back to the beginning. If you look at the books that sell the most in the world right now, it's like a bunch of like Stephen King and like like Michael Crichton-esque, like big, and romance, like these big literatures. But the number one book is still the Bible. And I had this idea, Nina. Maybe you can help me with this. Maybe we can do this together. Release a new Bible with just a bunch of the old books that may or may not get into it. We can pray over it if you'd like, and then we can put like we can put Mary Magdalene's in it. We can put the maybe Jesus was gay one in it, and sell it as like the controversial new Bible.
That is a genius idea. I agree, 100. I'm down with that. Right. If you go to the Jefferson Memorial, Jefferson did something like this, sort of the reverse. Mm-hmm. There's a thing called the Jefferson Bible. Right, have you ever heard of this?
Mm-hmm, I have.
And he cut out everything that had to do with the supernatural. Uh-huh. So it's a completely scientific document. Like, this probably could have happened. This stuff couldn't. And it's filled with little holes. I have a copy of it. A friend of mine bought it for me.
Nina, let's do it. Yeah. I'll put it out with my company, Foxtopus Inc. We'll figure out how it all works.
Oh,
and then,
my God, it's genius. And if we put the word Bible in the title.
Yeah. The new Bible or the controversial or the complete Bible.
Oh my God, you've just answered my retirement question.
All right, let's do it. Nina, I really appreciate you spending time with me. I like that you're fighting the good fight. Like, I like that we're here. We're trying to push the truth. We're not getting rich. We have subscribable newsletters. Okay,
so yes, please subscribe to my Freakshow.
Yeah, and it's great. I get it every week. Affordable rates. Also for mine, what's mine called? Magnetic North. Subscribe to them all, and keep this journalisming, so that the world is not just grifters, right?
Yeah, we want to define ourselves differently from them.
All right. I appreciate
How
it.
do we define ourselves differently? This is my last word. I always tell this my students. How can you tell fake from real news when people ask you what is the one way that you can decide whether it's real or not? If they ever ran a correction.
Right.
That's my yeah. I've run a few corrections in my day.
Yeah. Have to do it when you get
Yeah.
something wrong. Like, and there's nothing wrong with it.
Yes.
It's okay to be wrong.
That's right.
All right. Thank you, Nina Burleigh, everyone. Go check her out from Pokebear LLC in Denver, Colorado. This was Scott Carney Investigates. Thank you so much to all of my supporters on Patreon and on Substack who make this work possible. If you want early access and to get your name on the honor roll, please check out those links down below. And, it just means the world to me that you're here. From Pokebear LLC in Denver, Colorado, this was Scott Carney Investigates.